r/AskReddit. What's the biggest secret you've kept quiet that could have ruined lives? My paternal grandfather was treated as an idol of sorts by his wife and children, and that entire side of the family treated the eldest males like kings and the females like servants to those kings. This fostered an extreme sense of entitlement in my grandfather, father, and older brother in a way that is hard to explain. That part of the family feels like some sort of cult. When I was very young, my grandfather took a special interest in me, and I was just too young to realize what he was doing to me. The way he kissed me and touched me. My grandmother caught him once, and from that moment on, I was treated like some sort of outcast by her and my aunts. It took a long time for me to realize what was happening to me, but I always knew it felt so disgusting, and would make me want to wash with hot water. My grandfather did horrible things to me, and my grandmother knew about those things. The worst part of everything was that I could never tell anyone, not with the way the family hierarchy was arranged. I knew that my mother would be the only one to stand by my side, but that would just result in more beatings for her. The rest of the family would revile me, label me a liar, use all of their money to ruin my life and anyone that stood by my side, and perhaps even have me committed. I felt trapped. I adapted to this horrible life, eating so much that I just got so fat that hopefully no one would want me. Despite getting very fat, I learned how to disappear, walk so quiet that people couldn't hear me coming, walk so quickly that I couldn't be cornered or held back. For 7 years I was abused until I learned to adapt and run away. The old man got Alzheimer's and eventually cancer that ate him up, and I grew strong enough that I could stand up to my father, so the beatings that my mother and I would get from him stopped as well. I eventually got to the point where I became more independent and was able to get myself and my mother out of that situation. But growing up, I was never able to tell about how I was victimized because of all the lives it would ruin. Mine, my mother, and anyone who stood up for me. I'm unfortunately still suffering some of the consequences from what happened because I'm a little screwy in the head, have a love/hate relationship with the male species, and I'm still on the thicker side. Can I list a few? What the fuck am I doing? Wife of a dude I know asked me if I'd be interested in a one night stand a while back. Turned it down, obviously. Aside from the whole married thing, and the whole married to a really nice guy you know thing, she was in a really bad place emotionally at the time, and I'm not sure how many drinks it takes her to be drunk, so I like to think it was mostly/entirely attributable to that. She and her husband are working out their problems, and as far as I know, she never actually went through with it with anyone else. I'm glad she chose me, because a few others in her friend group probably wouldn't have said no, and now that won't be hanging over anyone's heads their entire lives. I'm thinking I'm probably the only one who's dealing with some form of guilt over that, and I'm really hoping she was too drunk to remember asking me in the first place, being the tool used to destroy someone's marriage, not something I ever wanted to be considered for. I didn't have an easy time dealing with that. == Got a 2-year degree in 6 years instead of a 4-year degree in 4 years because my parents promised to pay for half of my college education, and my dad got cancer in my last year of grade school. I didn't want to hurt their finances and their pride, and yet if I told them this now, I think it'd destroy them. The upside, at least, is that I have no student loans. I paid as I went for my half, and cited my known hatred for owing money as the sole reasoning for my choice. I also got that degree in something I didn't enjoy purely because it looked more financially promising, and I wanted to be able to provide for the woman I thought I was going to marry. Music, art, writing, all preferable to the joke that is business management. At least with something creative, I'd be doing something I love for a barely livable wage. Thank God I have an AA in something so generic and relatively useless instead. I know how to manage all of the employees I don't work with. And the big one. Almost committed suicide in late high school. My dad's cancer destroyed my family life. My sister ran from the problem, got married, moved out of state. My mom went rabid. If you tried to help, if you gave her space, no winning. And to this day I can still remember the most hurtful things she's ever said to me word for word. And my dad got obsessive with weird pet projects and was angry for most of the rest of the time. I'm not blaming any of them, because everyone copes in different ways, and they all needed as much support as I did. It's just that there wasn't really much left for me at the end of the day. I earned my Eagle Scout ranking just before my birthday, and as much of an achievement as that was, it was one more intense source of stress that I didn't need. I was in a church troop, which means that you're flooring it through the ranks until 14 when Boy Scout meetings stop in favor of church youth activities, slated for the same night and time. So my getting Eagle was mostly on my own steam, backed with a lot of pressure from my dad, who I really wanted to make proud. I almost didn't graduate from high school. I had a teacher blackball me, losing projects, etc. Gave me a 59.9%. So I had to take night classes and spend a couple of months fighting my high school counselor to get into a class with a better teacher. Eventually had to bring in my parents and have them tell her that they'd back my decision to drop out and get my JED if the transfer. Couldn't happen. I was an academic, generally the quietest kid in class, nose in my book, so this on top of everything else was a nightmare. I lost my faith for so many reasons. God just didn't make sense anymore. Prayers became lip service, sacrament became a superstitious compulsion, church became one more thing I had to fake my way through to be accepted by the people I'd built my life around. I became agnostic for the time being, step 1, but even now, the one reason I will always respect someone's being religious is that I know the warmth and comfort that comes from the security blanket that is an all-powerful presence that will always love and accept and help you, and I know how brutally cold and harsh life is without it. If there was any time in my life that I needed a heavenly father, it was the one time in my life that I heard and felt absolutely nothing. And if they can avoid that experience, more power to them. After years of failing miserably to make it past the ask her out without accidentally creeping her out, or trying too hard, or just flat out being rejected in some awful way, I finally found love. Read. I accidentally poached some abusive shit's girlfriend, and she left him for me. Seriously, I'd been trying since grade 1 to court girls. That's how I went about it, and it's more than likely why I failed so miserably. And finally, in grade 12, a girl I liked from a distance liked me back, the sweetest, kindest, introverted girl that really seemed to understand and essentially mirror the mixture of who I was and who I wanted to be, a light in the darkness. After about a month of her being the pristine girl of my little Mormon dreams, she took me to hang out with some friends of hers, where I let myself get pressured into smoking what I assume was tobacco with everyone else, buying cigarettes for some people, yes, over 18, and getting a sudden and extreme glimpse into the kind of person I'd started dating. I always thought that the start to anything sexual would have been based purely in love and affection, and I wasn't prepared for the recreational in semi-public perspective that I had forced on me that day. This was the person I'd seen as the only thing left keeping my head above water. She definitely wasn't the reason I went out later that night to buy a bottle of sleeping pills, but I could not for the life of me see anything else to hold on to after I'd dropped her off at home. The store was closed. They'd recently changed their hours from 11 PM to 10:30 PM. I had a sudden "what in the hell do you think you're doing" moment, called the friend of a friend, who I'd only met twice before, and asked her if I could come over for a while. I'm not sure why her, maybe because she was in that same sort of religious middle ground as I was, maybe because she just seemed so accepting, maybe just because she was a few minutes from the store I was standing in front of. I couldn't remember if I spent a few more hours trying to, but she got out of bed to welcome me into her home at around 11 PM on a Friday night. Made me some macaroni and cheese, and we half watched Futurama while I poured my heart and soul out to her. Just after midnight, I got a call from my parents, furious that I wasn't home yet. I was out after curfew, and boy was I in trouble. I hugged this girl who'd let me share the weight of my life with her, who'd given me a safe place to run to when I had no happy places left, and who'd so generously taken the time to talk me through the shitstorm that was my life at the time. And then I went back into the grind. This happened in 2006, and I'm still trying to heal. I haven't had much time for recovery since then. It's been a rough 8 years, but I remember the date, I remember the emotions, and I remember Amy opening the door for me and inviting me into her living room as clear as anything I've ever remembered. For someone like me, who usually only has a crystal clear recall for the worst experiences of my life, I cannot describe how much that means to me. In my experience, when it comes to not killing yourself, the first time is the hardest, and I don't think I would kept that stores closed, go find help mentality for much longer that I had. So I'm beyond grateful that I found someone like her to turn to. I haven't really spoken to her since then, but assuming I ever get married, she's first on my list of invitations, and I'll change the date to make sure she can attend. She's one of a very small group of people that I care about whose lives wouldn't in some way be ruined if I hadn't kept this quiet. I've told about 3 people, none of whom were greatly involved in my life at the time, and now I've told the internet. Thanks for reading, if you made it all the way through. I have my own personal little secret that, if revealed, could likely end up with me getting thrown in jail for multiple accounts of breaking and entering as well as turning someone's life into a living hell. So, a few years ago in my senior year of high school, I had this guy in my class who was a real, well, we'll just call him as fuck. As fuck treated women like shit, stuffed heads and toilet bowls. Specific example, he had knocked a girl up and basically forced her to abort the baby. Really, he just did all the stereotypical stuff douchebags do and then some. Anyway, one day as fuck decided to start targeting me for no real reason. For example, every time I would try and hit on a girl, he'd try and play me down, etc, etc. I would always play along and try to act like he wasn't getting to me in order to maintain my composure in public, but he was. I was always turned off by the idea of getting into a fist fight. As fuck was mostly talk, and nearly anyone who really wanted to could have probably beaten the living hell out of him, but I knew pain wasn't something that would have fazed him. I wanted to dig inside of his psyche and tear it to shreds. So one day, I sat in class, devising a plan to ruin as fuck's sanity. I closely tailed him over the next few months. Found out where his locker is, his address, what time he plays football, the grocery store he works at. Basically, I stalked as fuck until I had his weekly routine memorized down to a T. After those months of patient reconnaissance, phase 2 of my plan was ready to commence. So I bought a gnome. Why a gnome, you ask? Well, one day I made sure to leave school early so I could go over to as fuck's humble abode. I pulled up, looked around to make sure no one was home, and placed the gnome on his front doorstep. He tells people about the gnome the next day, but he's as fuck, so no one really cares. 2 days later, I arrive at school early before the football team makes their way outside. I knew I couldn't place a gnome smack dab in the middle of the 50-yard line, because then the whole team would see. Luckily for me, as fuck is too stupid to remember more than one locker combination at once, so he always left his football locker unlocked with a rubber band. I made my way inside the locker room and placed a gnome on the top shelf of his locker. He tells people about the gnome again. Teachers are starting to become concerned for his mental health. The rest of his peers think he's making it up. Another couple of days pass. I make my way to the grocery store in which he is employed. In a conversation I had with as fuck earlier in the year, he managed to let slip that one of his first tasks every day is restocking the dairy shelves. Needless to say, placed a gnome right behind the glass doors on the dairy aisle. Then one day at school, the hallway was empty, so I picked his main locker and left the gnome on the top shelf. His car window was rolled halfway down, so the inside would not get too hot during the day. Placed a gnome. At this point I was buying gnomes pretty frequently, just so I would always have one, if an opportunity presented itself. He doesn't even mention the gnomes to people anymore. I figure out that as fuck keeps a spare key under the AC vent outside of his home. So I decided to skip school and make my way inside. Placed 3 gnomes. One in the pantry, one in his bathroom, and one under the covers of his bed. A few days later I hear he's starting to fail his classes. His parents put up a fucking security camera. Ended up finding the blind spot and dodged that shit. Sent him a gnome for his birthday in the mail as well. As fuck didn't even show up to school much now. His parents had enrolled him in a behavioral psychotherapy program. At that point, I didn't really think about why I even did it anymore. It had just become part of my daily routine. I even checked my statements once and found out that I had spent $150 on gnomes in the span of 2 months, but I didn't care. I had a good job, and it was well worth it. The school year ends, and, after a whole summer of fun with as fuck, I headed off to college. It was a fun and happy time for me. As fuck didn't have that sort of luck. Didn't get into any schools because of his failing grades. Had to stay home and work at the grocery store to support himself. After the first semester, I had decided to come back home for the holidays. Caught up with some friends, started talking, all the usual stuff. Eventually someone tells me that someone from our high school had a panic attack and mental breakdown in the middle of our local grocery store. Lo and behold, it's as fuck. Someone had stocked an ohm in the home and garden section. It's not really that bad compared to some of the stuff on here. It happened around winter 2006. I was working on a geography project with a girl. As we got to know each other, she started dropping some really obvious hints that she liked me. We went out on dates, spent time together, worked together. I thought she was really nice and very cute. Only problem, she had a long-term boyfriend back home. At first this confused me a little, but I decided that, since she seemed alright with it, I would pursue it and see how far she was interested in taking it. At the time, relationships of any type were rare for me, especially with the opposite sex. I'm bi. Eventually, I make it known that I like her too and go in for the kiss. She breaks down crying. She admits that she really likes me, but is afraid to do anything because she has a boyfriend. I told her that if it was okay with her, it was okay with me. She goes into full mental breakdown mode and is sobbing for hours. She was feeling so lonely being away from home for the past years, had few friends, and was craving intimacy and companionship. But she is afraid to betray her boyfriend back home. I end up embracing her for several hours, literally, as she gets it all out. As she starts to calm down, we move to her place. She lets me get physical with her. We starting talking flirty and dirty with each other. Talk about our past sex lives and preferences. But she won't let me kiss her on the lips or touch her in inappropriate places or take her clothes off. But she enjoys me trying. As we are talking, I learn about her boyfriend, who she is engaged to. He is also a psychopath. He works retail while she is at college and calls her literally every time he takes a break. 3 to 6 times per day, every day. If she does not pick up immediately, he assumes she is cheating on him. If he hears noise in the background, he assumes it's a guy that she is cheating with. If she has any male friends, he assumes that she is cheating and makes her stop talking to them. This is one of the reasons she has so much trouble making friends at college, because this guy is trying to control her life from back home. I could tell that the girl was really suffering mentally from him, but insisted that things were better when she was back home with him, but also that he had a temper when he got mad. The girl and I became best friends for the next 3 days, which were also the last days of the project. I heard her take more than a dozen calls from her BF, during most of which he verbally and emotionally abused her. I sat there silent and heard him freak out over every background noise or hesitation in her voice. I also heard her spin the most elaborate lies to placate him, lying about every little detail of her daily life, mostly to keep him happy. I slowly realized that she had developed an unsettling ability to come up with and deliver the most convincing lies on the spot for any situation. I saw her use it with supervisors and professors that we worked with, as if it was second nature for her. Forgot to write a report. Oh no, the file got corrupted. Someone saw her crying in my arms. She just got a phone call that her best friend was in a car accident. On the last day, she finally let me kiss her. We had spent somewhere around 20 to 30 hours together over those 3 days, a lot of it holding hands and hugging. No lie, she wouldn't let it go further than that, but couldn't take her hands off me. When we at last started kissing, it was like someone broke down a wall inside her and she was finally free. We kissed for 4 hours, non-stop. After the first 2 hours her lips got chapped, but I felt too bad to tell her. We went out for food, then came back and kissed some more. She decided that it wasn't really cheating if we didn't have sex. I went home with blue balls every night for those 3 days. She also admitted that she was bi as well, but was sad that she would never get to explore her sexuality because that would be cheating and her boyfriend wouldn't allow it, let alone accept her for it. I did not see her much after that. The project ended. She graduated, went back home, removed me from her Facebook, and married the guy. I haven't spoken to her or seen her since. I have told a few people, but only ones, that are removed from her. If the guy found out, he would probably physically assault her, divorce her, and then try to hunt me down and assault me as well. It may be a bit late to post, but fuck it. I'm a teen who has 2 parents going through a divorce. My dad is a good man. He worked for the last 25 years or so as the president of a business. He is in his mid-50s. My mom, on the other hand, is not so good. She hasn't worked since my parents got together. She is in her mid-40s. The reason for the divorce is this: my mom is an alcoholic who left the house in October. We just moved into to live in the old unsold house. Anyway, she was living primarily there at most until January. The first time we, my brother, mother, and myself, planned to hang out, she was driven to our new house by her good friend, whom we will call Brett. It was not a part of the plan. We didn't go with her. The next time, she came alone, and I went out for lunch with her, which did not go well. The final time my brother and I hung out with her was a sleepover, which also went poorly. However, I have not seen Brett since that first encounter. Sadly, my mom still maintains contact with my dad. I say sadly for 2 reasons. The first is that my mom acts kind towards my dad when she needs to. For example, she wanted to go to an expensive rehab center. She needed 2 things to get this. My dad would have to pay for this, and she needed someone to drive her to an airport and fly down to Florida with her. So my dad wasted a good Saturday doing this. She is still there, but not for long. Let's go back a few months. I go to a Catholic school, despite being an atheist in a family of deists and agnostics, except for my mother, and was forced to be confirmed. My mom said that she would like to attend the ceremony. I said that would be great, and we could go out for dinner after if she insisted. However, she did not show up. I expected this, and was not torn by it. However, I was angered by her excuse. She claimed that my dad forbid her from attending the service. This was not true, for my dad made plans and reservations to a nice place that my mom and I would go to. She used a similar excuse about a week ago. She planned on coming to my graduation ceremony next week, but claimed that dad's lawyers blocked me from going. I questioned my dad on this, and I took his word for it when he said he did no such thing. It turns out that my mom can't make it because she won't be out of rehab until the end of the week and simply can't make it back in time. My mom is playing my dad like a set of cards, and he keeps on losing. The second reason it is sad that my dad keeps in personal contact with my mom is because it has affected me directly. About 2 months ago, my mom called my dad with bad news, which I overheard. Not my dad's fault. It was late at night and he most likely suspected that I was asleep. Brett, her good friend, kicked her out of his house, where she had apparently been living. He also had been stealing from the family. We had a large safe at our old house with valuables such as rings and the sort. Apparently, someone had stolen the items and then accessed my dad's bank account, taking most of money. My dad got the money situation under control, but the valuables are forever lost. The worst part of the call confirmed something I had suspected. When I first met the scumbag we can call Brett, he had been sleeping with my mom. This made me sick. It would likely destroy my brother. My sister probably wouldn't care, as she despised my mom already. This confirmation makes me sick, and makes me disappointed with my mom. She never was a great mom, consistently forgetting to cook us dinner and occasionally forgetting to pick us up from karate class some 5 years ago. However, I never thought she could do such a thing. On the bright side, the divorce has shown me the true value of my childhood. I now see how lucky I'm being previously oblivious to just the slightest detail in my dad's incredibly stressful life. I'm glad to know that I don't have to deal with that stuff for a few more years. I also have adopted a philosophy based on this episode of Red vs. Blue. The part where Church tells Carolina the importance of letting go just really struck deep within me. It really changed how I would tackle my problem. I must admit that it really kept me from delving into a terrible depression. I really enjoyed the series up to season 11, but season 11 and 12 have been really lackluster compared to the previous 10. Never mind that. Thanks for reading. TL. Doctor, mom had fucked another man and fucked up my life for a few days. Made an alt account specifically for this post. I have 2 stories actually. My ex's stepfather molested her for years when she was younger. She only told me bits and pieces of it, but I had all that I needed to know. When I asked her why she never told her mom, she said it was because her mom was happy with them and she didn't want to ruin the marriage. The second will be a bit harder to understand for some, I think, and also has to do with my ex. 3 years before I met my ex, her older brother was shot and killed in front of my house at the time, with my father, great aunt, cousins and myself all standing potentially in the line of fire. I saw everything. It was more of a drive-by scenario and I even got a glimpse of the shooter as he pulled away. It doesn't really matter that I saw the shooter in the car because I had seen the shooter and that car around the neighborhood before and had even spoke to him on a couple occasions before that night. We were immediately told to get in the house by the drug dealers around the block. We did as we were told and called the police for my ex's brother. He sat out there, probably mortally wounded, in his car for at least 30 minutes before police showed up. When the police did show up to question us, I stayed in the back room. I don't remember much after that night. Maybe some of the next day, but nothing for weeks. I was 14. I spent a really long time trying to forget. I'd have nightmares every now and again, but nothing too serious. Then out of no fucking where, just when I had put it behind me, the girl that I'm pursuing and flirting with tells me that her brother's death day is coming up. She didn't mention the date, but the time of year started to bring back memories. I described the car. She said that sounded like her brother's, and then all I remembered everything again. I had recurring nightmares for the next 3 or 4 nights. I cried myself to sleep most of those nights. The hardest part though was not telling her mother that I knew what I knew. At her request mostly, but also out of fear and respect for the group that the shooter ran with. They looked after me and my cousins growing up, and we had family friends that ran with them. I lived in the hood, if you can't tell by now. I didn't want to put my family in danger by testifying, so when my ex's mom eventually learned that her son died in front of my house and asked for any information I could give, I looked my ex's mom in her face as she cried and told her I didn't know anything. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe the channel.